Umbrian Hills, present day. The smell of dust and incense hung in the air as Brother Matteo knelt beneath the worn altar of the chapel, chisel in hand. The monastery, quiet and tucked away in the Umbrian Hills, was undergoing a long overdue restoration. Time had softened the stones, and secrets had settled into the cracks. He had been chipping at the base of the altar when his tool struck something hollow. Curious, he pried open a seam behind a loose stone. Inside, wrapped in crumbling cloth and tied with faded cord, lay a fragile scroll. His fingers trembled as he lifted it out. By candlelight he unfurled the brittle parchment. Ancient Latin inscriptions lined the page, but the title was unmistakably clear: Veritas Francesco, the truth of Francesco di Bernardone, whom the world calls Saint. A chill swept through the room as if centuries had exhaled at once. Matteo read on, eyes wide. The words weren't the polished hagiographies found in gilded books. These were raw, unguarded, written not for glory, but confession. Let the world know him not only as saint, but as man, he who walked among beggars and beasts, torn between heaven and his own broken heart. The candle flickered. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, the wind stirred the trees like a distant voice awakening. And so the truth began to speak, not of halos, but of dust and doubt, and a man named Francis. This is True Crime Life Stories channel. If you're new to our channel, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to click on the notification button to get notified anytime we upload a new video. Assisi, late 12th century. The sun spilled like molten gold over the terracotta rooftops of Assisi, bathing the cobbled streets in warmth. Laughter echoed through narrow alleys as merchants shouted over one another, peddling silks, spices, and songbirds. It was a town wrapped in its own rhythm, faith in one hand, commerce in the other. At its center stood the house of Pietro di Bernardone, the wealthiest cloth merchant in the region, and within it his son, Francesco. He was not yet the saint the world would one day kneel before. No, this Francesco was flesh and fire, charming, impulsive, and adored. His dark curls framed a face too handsome for humility. His laughter was music in the piazza, his generosity legendary among friends and tavern keepers alike. "Francesco, you'll ruin the hem on that tunic," his father barked, as the young man bounded down marble steps, his cloak of crimson and gold trailing behind him. Pietro, grizzled and sharp-eyed, stood at the foot of the stairs inspecting bolts of imported silk. "That's Italian weave, not peasant rags," Francis grinned. "Then I'll wear it like a prince on the battlefield," Pietro sighed. "A merchant's son should mind ledgers, not daydreams of war. You'll inherit my trade, not a sword." But Francis was intoxicated by the scent of glory. Tales of crusades and knighthood filled his head. Honor, banners, armor gleaming in the sun. He longed to carve his name into the legend of men. Commerce was safe, dull, predictable. He craved immortality, not inventory. Still, he humored his father. He smiled, flirted with clients, ran errands through the markets. He was a master of appearances, a son born to charm, even as he resisted becoming a replica of the man who raised him. By night, Assisi transformed. Candles lit the interiors of villas, and laughter spilled into courtyards. Francis held court among friends, musicians, poets, and noble-born misfits. He spared no coin for wine, music, or fine fabrics. In his silk-lined world, indulgence wasn't sin, it was status. But there were moments, small, flickering things, when the mask slipped. Once, while exiting the cathedral after Mass, Francis paused at the church steps, where a leper crouched, hand outstretched, face hidden beneath scars and rot. People recoiled, whispering prayers as they passed. Francis did too, at first, but halfway down the steps he stopped. Turning back, he knelt and placed a coin in the man's hand. Their eyes met, just for a second. Something in that gaze, pain, yes, but also recognition, made Francis flinch. He said nothing of it to his friends. He laughed louder that night, danced harder. But the image clung to him, like incense clinging to robes long after Mass had ended. These brief acts of compassion puzzled even Francis. They were inconvenient truths, cracks in the polished mirror he held up to the world. "You spoil him," his mother Pica often warned Pietro. "He dreams too high, and if he falls, it will not be from a merchant's ladder." But Pietro would only scoff. "Let him fly. The world loves birds with bright feathers, and when the wind shifts, he'll come home to trade, just like I did." Francis had no intention of returning. In the spring of his 20th year, word came of conflict. The city of Perugia had moved against Assisi. The drums of war beat through the hills, and Francis saw his moment. He stood before his father in polished armor, a gift from Pietro himself, though he wore it with more pride than understanding. Beneath the weight of chainmail and youthful ambition, Francis felt himself finally becoming the hero of his own tale. "This is foolishness," Pietro muttered, though he had paid for the horse, the sword, the embroidered surcoat. Francis leaned forward, lips at his father's ear. "One day you'll boast that your son rode with kings." His father said nothing. Before dawn he rode out with the Assisian cavalry, the wind whipping through the valley, his banner snapping in the air like a promise. He did not look back. He rode away as Francesco the Dreamer, draped in pride and velvet dreams. But the road ahead would not lead him to a throne. It would strip him, wound him, bury him, and raise something altogether different from the ashes. And somewhere, far beyond the hills, destiny began to whisper, not in shouts of glory, but in the quiet voice of poverty, pain, and a truth he had yet to meet. The war between Assisi and Perugia, late 12th century. The first days of war were nothing like the tales. Francis had imagined a battlefield like tapestry, noble steeds, banners raised high, clashing swords under a noble sky. But what he found instead was mud, moaning, and fear. The Battle of Collestrata, just beyond the green hills of Assisi, was swift and brutal. The Perugians struck with the cold precision of seasoned soldiers. The Assisian force, half made of overconfident youths like Francis, crumbled within hours. He fought, or tried to. His sword felt heavy, foreign in his hands. The cries of dying men weren't poetic. They were jagged, animal, soaked in blood and regret. He saw comrades fall, with eyes wide in disbelief. A spear knocked him from his horse. He remembered the crack of bone, the blinding pain in his side, the breath rushing from his lungs as Perugian soldiers circled the survivors. And then, darkness. When he awoke, he was in chains. Not a hero, not a knight, but a prisoner of war. They stripped him of his fine armor and rich tunic. What remained was just a young man in soiled linen, shivering in a Perugian dungeon, surrounded by the groans of the wounded. Days became indistinguishable from nights. Food came in scraps. Disease lingered in the corners. His side throbbed where the spear had pierced, but he survived, barely. Francis stared at the stone walls, his pride unraveling stitch by stitch. Where was the glory now? The songs? The praise? He had left Assisi draped in dreams. Here, in the cold and filth, he had nothing but silence and questions he couldn't answer. He began to talk to God, not in reverence, but in defiance. "Why me? Where are you? Did you make me for this?" No answer came, only silence and the sound of rats in the dark. Months passed. His noble birth and father's coin eventually bought him release, but something had cracked inside him. When he returned to Assisi, there were no cheers, no parade. His friends had forgotten him, or died. His armor was gone, his limp a fresh reminder that the world was not as kind as he'd once believed. His father welcomed him with cautious joy, trying to press ledgers back into his hands, fine robes back onto his shoulders. But Francis wandered. He no longer laughed the way he used to. The parties felt hollow. The taste of wine turned sour on his tongue. He stared longer at beggars now, not out of pity, but out of recognition. The streets that once felt like a stage now felt like a cage. He began walking outside the city, into the hills, seeking silence. Not for prayer, not yet, but for escape, for clarity. One day, as he rested by an abandoned chapel in San Damiano, its walls crumbling and ivy-choked, he heard something, a whisper, a thought, a breath of wind. "Francis, repair my house, which, as you see, is falling into ruin." He stood frozen. It was not a voice like thunder or angels. It was soft, and yet it struck him like the point of a blade. He looked around. The chapel's walls were indeed falling. Stones lay scattered like broken teeth. He could have dismissed it, blamed hunger, madness, but something stirred deep within, beneath the layers of vanity and fear. He returned with stones, mortar, his own hands. The townspeople laughed. The merchant's son plays builder now? Children threw pebbles. Old friends whispered of fevered minds and delusions. But Francis kept building. It wasn't sainthood yet, not wisdom, just movement. One broken man placing stone upon stone, trying to find meaning in the silence. One evening he passed a leper on the road. The man's face was disfigured beyond recognition. Flies hovered over open sores. The stench made Francis recoil. Every instinct screamed to turn away, to cross the road, to throw a coin and keep walking. But he didn't. Something inside him, something new and unfamiliar, held him still. He approached. The leper's eyes lifted, wary and hollow. Francis knelt. He placed a hand upon the man's shoulder. His skin was rough, wet, trembling. He did not flinch. He leaned in and kissed the man's cheek. He wept after, not out of disgust, but because something inside him had broken open, and in that breaking he felt clean. Back in the town square, Pietro grew anxious. His son was no longer selling cloth, no longer mingling with nobles or expanding the family name. He was giving away money, spending time with beggars, repairing ruined chapels. He was becoming a stranger. "You shame our house," Pietro hissed one evening. "We gave you everything, and now you spend your days in dirt with beggars?" Francis looked at his father, eyes calm. "You gave me comfort, yes, but not purpose. God doesn't put purpose in beggars, Francis. He puts it in gold, cloth, trade." Francis smiled faintly. "Then perhaps I am not seeking the God you know." The merchant's son had shattered, but in the ruins of that shattering a new man was being formed, not yet saint, not yet whole, but awake at last to something deeper than applause or armor. The boy who left Assisi to earn a name was gone. In his place stood a man who had lost everything, and perhaps, in doing so, had just begun to find himself. Assisi, early 13th century word, spread like wildfire. The merchant's son is mad. Francis preaches to the wind. He gives his father's coin to beggars and calls it virtue. Assisi, small and tight-laced in its pride, could not contain the scandal. Pietro di Bernardone, once the proud father of the most promising youth in town, now walked the streets with a red face and gritted teeth. Francis was giving everything away. He sold bolts of cloth from his father's store without permission. The profits, meant for trade and expansion, vanished into the hands of beggars and masons, widows and lepers. He used the money to repair chapels, feed the hungry, and clothe the sick. To Pietro, it wasn't charity, it was theft. "You'll bring ruin to our house," Pietro bellowed when Francis returned home one evening, robes torn, hands filthy with mortar. "You dare touch what is not yours? You rob your own blood?" Francis met his father's rage with unnerving calm. "It was never truly mine. It's not yours either. It all belongs to God." Pietro struck him. Francis stumbled back, lips bleeding, but he did not raise a hand in return. The next day Pietro marched to the Bishop of Assisi, dragging his son by the arm, fuming with a father's fury and a merchant's wounded pride. He demanded justice, demanded restitution. He wanted his name cleared and his coin returned. The bishop agreed to preside over the matter in public. All of Assisi gathered in the cathedral square, merchants, nobles, beggars, curious children, cloaked clergy. They came not for justice, but for spectacle. Francis stood at the center, gaunt and barefoot, facing the man who had raised him. Pietro's voice rang through the square. He has squandered my goods, stolen my cloth, defied my house. Let him return what is mine and renounce this madness. The bishop turned to Francis. Do you deny your father's claim? Francis did not speak at first. He looked around, at the church, the crowds, the mountain of expectation pressing down on his shoulders. Then he looked at Pietro. Slowly, with a trembling hand, Francis untied the belt from his waist. He pulled his tunic over his head, the last fine cloth his father had given him, and laid it at the bishop's feet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He stood naked, pale against the stone, spine straight, eyes burning not with shame, but with clarity. Until now, he said, voice steady, I have called Pietro di Bernardone my father. But from this day on, I say with all my heart, Our Father who art in heaven, he is my only father. The silence was absolute. Even Pietro's rage faltered. The bishop stepped forward, gently removing his own cloak and wrapping it around Francis. There was compassion in the gesture, and something more, recognition, of conviction, of surrender, of truth. In that moment Francis was no longer a son of merchants or Assisi's golden youth. He had become something other, something dangerous perhaps, but undeniable. After that day Francis became a man without a name in the eyes of the world. He slept in abandoned chapels, wandered the woods, begged for food in the streets where once he had strutted in silk. His feet bled, his stomach hollowed. But there was peace in the hunger. He called the sun his brother, the moon his sister, and the birds his kin. He preached to trees and stones and the wind. People mocked him, children threw dirt. But a few, a precious few, stopped to listen. He told them wealth was a cage and that freedom was found in simplicity. He spoke of love, not just for the divine, but for all creation, even the forgotten, the diseased, the broken. He did not speak like a priest. He lived his sermons, and slowly the world began to notice. One evening, as he knelt outside San Damiano in prayer, a young nobleman named Bernardo approached. I saw you in the square the day you left your father, he said. I thought you were mad, but now I wonder if it is we who are mad, clinging to gold and pride like lifeboats in a storm. Francis smiled. I am not wise, he said, only free. Bernardo stayed. Then came another, Giles, then Rufino, then Leo. One by one, men laid down their swords, their robes, their inheritance. They followed a barefoot man who had nothing, and in him found everything. Francis returned often to San Damiano, rebuilding it stone by stone, not just the chapel, but the broken image of faith he saw around him. The church, bloated with power, had forgotten its poverty, its Christ who walked among the lepers. He would remind them, not with anger, but with example. The renunciation in the square was not an ending. It was the beginning, the death of the merchant's son, the birth of the man the world would one day call saint. Assisi and the Umbrian countryside, early 13th century. At first they were just men, sons of nobles, soldiers, clerks, and merchants, like Francis himself. But they came one by one, drawn not by sermons, but by a life that defied logic. They saw him sleeping on dirt floors, kissing lepers, weeping with joy beneath open skies. He had no wealth, no title, no power. And yet in his eyes burned something they had never known, freedom. And so they came. Bernardo di Quintavalle was the first, a man of wealth, influence, and reputation. He was not easily swayed by theatrics, but he had watched Francis closely since that morning in the square. the naked man wrapped in a bishop's cloak. Something had pierced him that day. He invited Francis to stay at his home for a night. That evening, after Francis had eaten and quietly gone to sleep on the stone floor, refusing even the cushion offered to him, Bernardo stayed awake, heart heavy. In the middle of the night he crept into the church of San Niccolò and opened the Gospel 3 times, praying for direction. The first verse, "If you would be perfect, go, sell what you have, and give to the poor." The second, "Take nothing for your journey, neither staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money." The third, "If any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross." Bernardo didn't hesitate. The next morning he gave away everything he owned and walked out of Assisi barefoot beside Francis. Then came Giles, a simple farmer with a wild smile and strong hands. Rufino, cousin to the noblewoman Claire, soft-spoken and contemplative. Leo, a former canon with eyes like still water. By spring there were 12 brothers, bound not by blood but by poverty, not by rule but by love. They wore coarse tunics tied with simple rope. They slept under trees, ate what was given to them, and walked from town to town proclaiming peace. Francis never sought to command them. He did not call himself father or master. He was simply Francis, the lesser brother, the frater minor. Their days began with prayer and ended with praise. In between they worked, in fields, kitchens, and leper colonies. When they were mocked, they smiled. When they were hungry, they thanked God. When they were beaten, and it happened often, they forgave. They were poor in everything but joy. They called themselves penitents of Assisi. But Francis knew it was more than that. Something was taking root, something bigger than him. The church at the time was bloated with gold and tangled in politics. Bishops lived like princes. Priests sold indulgences. Francis and his brothers, ragged, barefoot, and smiling, were a rebuke without words. People listened, not to lofty theology, but to witness. Villagers wept as the brothers cared for lepers. Children followed them through fields, laughing as they preached to the birds. Even the stones seemed to lean in. One day Francis gathered the brothers beneath a tree. "We must ask for guidance," he said, "so that we do not walk according to our will, but his." They prayed, fasted, and then journeyed together to Rome, dusty and exhausted. Their tunics were stained, their feet blistered. But Francis carried no fear, only hope. He sought an audience with Pope Innocent III, the most powerful man in Christendom. The cardinals laughed when they saw them. "They look more like beggars than monks," one sneered. But the Pope was curious. The moment Francis knelt before him, something strange stirred in Innocent. He later confessed to dreaming of a crumbling church and a small man holding it up with bare hands. He listened. Francis did not ask for privileges. He only asked that he and his brothers be allowed to live the gospel, literally, to own nothing, to serve all, to preach peace. The Pope hesitated. It was radical, dangerous, but something about Francis pierced through the robes and gold. He granted his verbal blessing, and with that the little band of brothers returned to Assisi, not with titles or power, but with permission to live in complete surrender. The movement exploded. Men came from all corners of Italy to follow Francis. They were peasants, scholars, knights, even former priests. They left everything, money, land, comfort, to walk the dusty roads. Francis sent them out in pairs, never alone. "Wherever you go," he told them, "say, 'Peace be with this house.' And if they welcome you, stay and bless them. If they do not, shake the dust from your feet and move on." They crossed mountains, valleys, and city gates. They braved wolves and winter storms. Some were stoned, others imprisoned. But they returned with faces glowing. Francis wept with joy. But with growth came tension. Some brothers wanted more structure, more stability. They worried about the future, about discipline, about reputation. Francis listened, but his heart ached. "This is not ours," he reminded them. We are only guests at the feast of God. The moment we try to control it, we lose the very spirit that gave it birth. Still, he agreed to write a simple rule, a way of life grounded in Scripture, humility, and the love of Christ. Not law, but a compass. The Pope later approved a more formal version, and the Order of Friars Minor was born. But Francis still called them what they were, brothers. By the firelight, after long days of walking, they sang songs to Sister Moon and Brother Wind. They laughed over dry bread and prayed with outstretched hands. They were poor, bruised, and often cold, but they were free in a way the world could not understand. And in the center of it all was Francis, no longer alone. The man who once dreamed of glory in armor had found it, not through conquest, but through communion, not in war, but in brotherhood. Assisi and San Damiano, 1212 A.D. She had watched him from a distance. From behind lace-trimmed windows and beneath her velvet veil, Clare of Assisi observed the barefoot preacher who wandered the streets like a joyful beggar. She had heard the whispers, some mocking, some in awe. Francesco de Bernardone, once the pride of Assisi, had renounced everything. And yet, something about him shone. Clare was 18, born into nobility, betrothed to comfort and position. Her family expected her to marry well, to uphold the honor of the Ofreduccio name. But deep within her, beneath the silks, beneath the rosaries and gentle smiles, stirred a yearning, one she could not yet name. She first heard him preach on Palm Sunday. The cathedral was full. Francis stood before the people, not in robes, but in his plain tunic, sun-darkened and barefoot. He did not thunder like the priests. He did not quote canon law. He simply spoke of Jesus, of love that bleeds, of freedom through surrender, and Clare's soul burned. He spoke not at them, but to her. "He was rich, yet became poor for your sake," Francis said, eyes soft and alive, "so that you too might become rich, not in gold, but in love." She returned to her home that night, but something had shifted. Her chamber felt like a prison. The perfumes made her gag. The jewels on her neck itched like chains. Her father, Count Favarone, could see her eyes changing, and he began to worry. But it was too late. She sought Francis secretly. It was the night of Palm Sunday when she left. Slipping out under moonlight, hair unbound, heart hammering. She passed the silent gates of the city, walked the path to Santa Maria degli Angeli, where Francis and the brothers waited. He met her at the door of the chapel, candlelight flickering across his face. Clare fell to her knees. "I belong to Christ now," she whispered, "and I wish to live as you do, poor, free, and his alone." Francis saw in her not weakness, but fierce clarity. He cut her hair by the altar, and gave her a coarse tunic to wear. With that act, Clare renounced the world. Her family was outraged. They stormed the convent where she first stayed, demanding her return. Her uncles arrived, swords drawn, threatening the sisters. Clare clung to the altar, pulled back her veil, and revealed her shorn head. She declared herself the bride of Christ, and not even the iron will of noblemen could touch her. Eventually she fled to San Damiano, the crumbling church Francis had rebuilt, stone by stone. There she would remain for the rest of her life, founding a new way of being, not just for herself, but for countless women after her. They came to her as they had to Francis, young women from noble houses, sisters, cousins, handmaidens. They left their homes, snuck out at night, and joined Clare in the stone enclosure of San Damiano. They called themselves the Poor Ladies, and, like the Friars Minor, they owned nothing, wore nothing fine, and spent their lives in prayer and service. But Clare did not want cloistered silence alone. She desired communion with the poor, compassion for the sick, and solidarity with the forgotten. She begged the Pope not for a rule of privilege, but for the privilege of poverty. Many churchmen didn't understand, but she remained steadfast. Eventually, the church relented. Francis and Clare shared a bond deeper than romance. They saw each other's souls. He called her his little plant, and she called him her pillar of light. They met rarely in later years, always in the presence of God. Their love was not eros, but agape, a love rooted in divine longing, in sacrifice, in shared vision. There were rumors, of course, tongues wagged, but anyone who had seen them pray side by side knew theirs was a holy fire that burned without consuming. Once, during Lent, Francis came to San Damiano in secret. Clare prepared a simple meal. They sat together on the floor, speaking of Christ and the cross. As they prayed, a blazing light filled the room. The villagers nearby saw the chapel glowing from afar. Some thought it was on fire. They ran to help, but when they arrived, they found only the two friends, kneeling in stillness, bathed in a peace that words could not hold. Years passed. The poor ladies grew. Clare remained behind the walls, never traveling, yet her words and witness spread like seeds in wind. Women in Germany, France, and Spain sought to live as she did, poor, joyful, and free. She wrote letters to encourage them. In one she said, "Place your mind before the mirror of eternity. Let Christ be the light that guides you. What you hold, hold. What you do, do gently. What you are, be fully for Him." When Francis grew ill and could no longer walk, it was to San Damiano that he returned. Clare cared for him with tenderness. She washed his sores. She fed him by hand. She wept when he wept, laughed when he laughed. In their final conversations, nothing needed to be said. They had given everything and found more than they ever imagined. Clare would outlive Francis by nearly 3 decades, but she never left the path, never softened her vow, never once returned to silk or silver. At her death, the Pope rushed to canonize her, but she would have smiled gently and shrugged. She had never lived for titles. She had lived for truth and for him. Mount Laverna, 1224 A.D. The wind howled through the pine-covered cliffs of Laverna, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and moss. Autumn had begun its slow golden descent, painting the mountain in hues of amber and crimson. Here, far from the noise of Assisi, Francis had come to seek silence, the deepest kind, where even the voice of one's own soul quiets to listen. He was worn thin. Years of preaching, fasting, traveling barefoot through rain and snow had taken their toll. His body, once youthful and strong, was now riddled with pain. His eyes were nearly blind. He coughed blood at night. Yet he smiled still, with the same boyish radiance that had once charmed the streets of Assisi. But inside something stirred, an ache no physician could heal. It was not his body that suffered most, but his heart. He longed to be one with Christ, not in symbol, not in prayer alone, but in flesh, in every wound, in every breath. He had followed his Lord into poverty, into scorn, into joy. Now he sought to follow him into suffering. He withdrew deeper into the cliffs. Only a few brothers accompanied him. They built a small hut for shelter, but Francis spent most of his time in a stone crevice that opened out into the forest. There, wrapped in solitude, he fasted and prayed for 40 days, especially during the feast of the exaltation of the cross. He would not eat. He barely slept. He cried out into the sky, into the woods, into the silence, "My Lord and my God, show me how to love you as you deserve." One morning, as the sun rose behind the peaks and light broke in shafts through the canopy, it came. A sudden stillness fell over the mountain. The birds stopped singing. The wind ceased. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. Francis had fallen to the ground in prayer when a burning light appeared above him, radiant and terrible. From the heart of that brilliance came a seraph, 6-winged and aflame, bearing the image of the crucified. The sight pierced him, not with fear, but with a love so fierce it shattered his soul. He cried out, not in agony, but in awe, and as the seraph descended, it marked him. The pain was immediate, his hands torn as if pierced by nails, his feet wounded, raw, and in his side a gash that wept blood. The marks of the passion carved into his flesh. He curled onto the ground, clutching his side, weeping, not from pain, though it burned like fire, but from the intimacy of it. He had asked to know the heart of Christ, and Christ had answered. He was the first in known history to bear the stigmata. He tried to hide it. When the brothers came to check on him, he wrapped his hands in cloth and walked with difficulty. He said little, but they noticed. The smell of blood, the way he grimaced as he moved, the marks glimpsed when his sleeves fell back. Brother Leo, his closest companion, finally asked. Francis lowered his gaze and whispered, "The Lord has written his love into my body." Word began to spread. The mountain became a place of awe, even fear. Some said angels had visited. Others claimed Francis had been taken up into the heavens. Many refused to believe it. Others fell to their knees when they saw the blood-stained tunics. But Francis refused glory. He did not preach about his wounds. He did not show them like relics. He wrapped them in humility and silence. They were not his to boast about, they were his cross, and his greatest gift. Pain became his companion. Each step was agony. His eyes dimmed further. He was carried now more than he walked. Yet he sang, even through the suffering. It was during this time he composed the Canticle of the Sun, a hymn of praise not from comfort, but from the heart of affliction. He thanked God for brother wind, sister water, and even for sister death, whom he now felt drawing near. One night Leo found him lying awake, shaking from fever. Francis took Leo's hand and whispered, "Do you understand, brother? The closer I draw to pain, the nearer I am to love. These wounds, they are not mine, they belong to him, and I would not trade them for the world." Mount Laverna would forever bear the memory. They say the trees near the cliff where he received the stigmata still bow slightly, as if bent by that holy light. A chapel was built there, carved into the rock. Pilgrims would come for centuries, placing their hands on the stone where he lay, seeking something they could not name. But for Francis, it was never about miracles. It was about union, not sainthood, not fame, but oneness with the crucified. When he descended from the mountain, he was barely a man, fragile, broken, and radiant. He would live 2 more years, but his journey was nearly complete. The merchant's son, who once sought glory on the battlefield, had found it, not in war, but in wounds, not in conquest, but in love that suffers. And though his body would weaken, his spirit had never burned brighter. Assisi, 1226 A.D. Autumn returned once more to Umbria, golden and crisp, as it had so many times before. But this season bore a weight of finality. The sun still rose over the olive groves and rooftops of Assisi, but for the brothers of the order every dawn felt borrowed. Francis was dying. They had brought him down from Laverna, gently, reverently, like a relic before its time. He had asked to be brought home, not to the bustling center of the town that once knew him as a prince of revelry, but to the quiet edge of it, to the portiuncula, the little chapel he had rebuilt stone by stone with his own hands. It was fitting that the man who had embraced nothingness should return not to a palace, but to a hut, barely more than a shelter, cradled in the arms of nature and song. His body was crumbling. He lay on a mat of straw, his robe clinging to his thin frame, the marks of the stigmata still fresh and bleeding. His breath was shallow, his skin pale like parchment. But his eyes, oh, those eyes, still burned with the same intensity that once challenged bishops and embraced lepers. The brothers wept quietly as they tended to him. They sang the hymns he had taught them, soft, trembling harmonies of joy and surrender. And Francis, ever the troubadour of God, would raise a trembling hand and smile. "Do not weep for me, brothers. Death is no enemy. She is my sister." Even as death approached, Francis was not preoccupied with fear or legacy. He spoke not of the miracles attributed to him, nor of the multitudes who now followed his way. He only spoke of love. He asked to have his robe removed, not for comfort, but for humility. He had come into this world naked, and so he would return, a beggar until the end. They laid him on the bare earth, his face turned toward the darkening sky, and he murmured praises to the God of sun and moon, fire and frost, beast and blossom. He asked for the canticle of the creatures to be sung. Even now, blind and fevered, he whispered its lines with joy. Praised be you, my Lord, through our sister death, from whom no living man can escape. Woe to those who die in mortal sin. Blessed are those whom she finds doing your most holy will. Brother Leo, his faithful companion, knelt beside him and wept openly. Francis, he whispered, what shall we do without you? Francis reached up, his hand trembling, and placed it on Leo's chest. You will do what I have always done. Follow Christ, naked, joyful, and free. As evening fell, the birds gathered in the olive trees outside, as if drawn by some celestial rhythm. Some say they sang louder than ever that night. Others claim the light in the sky grew unnaturally warm, as if heaven had opened its gates. Francis asked for bread. He broke it weakly with Brother Angelo, a final Eucharist shared in simplicity. Then, just before midnight, he lifted his eyes once more, a faint smile curling on his lips. Welcome, Sister Death, he breathed. And with those words he slipped away, not with terror, not with struggle, but like a leaf falling into the embrace of autumn wind. The world did not know it yet, but something holy had passed through it, and gone home. They buried him beneath the stars at San Giorgio, though his remains would later be moved to the grand basilica that bears his name. But Francis had never cared for tombs of stone. His soul belonged to the fields, the forests, the poor, and the wind. In time he would be canonized. Kings would speak his name. Artists would paint his image in fresco and gold. Pilgrims would weep at his tomb. Orders would flourish under his rule. But Francis, the real Francis, the barefoot dreamer from Assisi, had simply wanted to love and be loved by Christ, Assisi and beyond, across centuries. The bells tolled through the streets of Assisi, solemn and slow, as the town mourned the loss of its most improbable saint. The rich man turned beggar, the reveler turned mystic, the boy who once dreamed of knights and banners, now immortalized by poverty and peace. But death did not silence Francis. It amplified him. Thank you for watching and staying through with us. If you would like to know more about Francis of Assisi, drop your comments and tell us what you want to know.